Welcome back to the second session of today's talks. Today we would discuss in detail about few characterization techniques of solar cell devices. Uh, you know me, so I will not introduce myself again. Uh, Important aspect of today's talk is mainly focused on answering some of your questions you have raised last 2 days. So few points which you have been asking after the talk or in the middle of talk, I thought we can address this in this because in this particular presentation. So I have made this very informal. Unlike yesterday, where I'm sure many of you are waiting for me to stop. Today, I hope I would not continue forever. I would give you examples of our own current research. And using these examples, I'll tell you what are the various ways you can characterize your devices or how you can actually understand your devices. So this is the main theme of today's talk. What are the various tools we have to understand or study the devices we have in the lab or anything else? Okay, so how good is your device? That's the first question we want to answer. How to characterize the materials used in OSC devices. I would like to restrict myself to organic solar cell devices because every device technology, every type of devices has its own different ways of characterizing. So it would be impossible for me to cover everything. I thought I would pick up this particular niche area, which is our expertise and also which many of you who would like to do experiments in the lab may go about and doing it. Okay, so we would try to use various opportunities that comes when we want to understand our own systems. So we characterize the physical properties, electrical properties, optical properties. So we use all these things to get a complete understanding of the material part and see how this enhancement or in the understanding of these material properties help us in understanding the overall device performance. And I will get to this entire story by examples from various organic solar cell devices in our lab or something which we have done ourselves. Okay. Yeah. So the first thing which is established now with last 2 days of talks is that as soon as you make a solar cell, as soon as you have a solar cell, you first do the fundamental electrical characterization, that is, put it under a solar simulator and measure its JV characteristics. Okay, so these are the points which you see. You need to extract your VOC, open circuit voltage, short circuit current, find out what is the Pmax. So the ratio of the product of VP, VMP and GMP, which is to the VOC times JSC is a fill factor. So the product of a fill factor VOC JSC divided by the input power gives you the overall efficiency. So this is how you first characterize your solar cell. If your solar cell does not have a good efficiency, there is no point in doing anything else. You can throw it out or you try to sit and think why you didn't get it. Correct? We cannot simply throw out whatever we did in the lab. So the characterization part comes next to understand why your device doesn't live up to your expectations. Why is it not working? Or let's say you got an excellent device. You're surprised yourself. In your lab, you never got more than 1%. Suddenly you get 10% efficiency. So 10 times more, right? You are surprised. Why is it so? So it is also important to understand why your devices perform really good. So these things these are the main points which I will try to address in the next 1.5 hours or so. Okay. Now, this is the ideal. This is the equivalent circuit of any solar cell, and we take the simplest case, which is a one diode model. One can go advanced level and go for a two diode models. I'm not bringing that here because of the complexity involved in going to the two diode model system. So if you simply consider this solar cell as a single diode, you can make it into two parts. One is an ideal component, and the second, which deviates this solar cell from which is nothing but a diode from your ideal diode case. Okay. So you should get this kind of thing, right? This is the ideal behavior, but then because you deviated from the ideal, this is the non-ideal diode behavior, and you want to understand why this has gone from here to here. So this is the point here. The ideal case should have the current J varying as JSC, which is a short circuit current that happens in the dark current configuration, minus this because of your illumination of the light, which is J0 times e power QV by KBT minus 1. So this is what is happening. And then VOC is given by the equation K times T by Q. T is the temperature of your ambient conditions where you're measuring your solar cell. If you increase the temperature, VOC also changes. So one should keep in mind how the temperature is changing in your solar cell when you're measuring it. Okay, times ln JC by J naught plus 1. So this is the simple ideal diode case, and we have also discussed yesterday how we go away from the ideal behavior to a non-ideal case. So the non-ideality, the deviation from the ideality comes into picture when you consider this two resistance, which is the series resistance and a shunt resistance. Okay, now your J, which is the current in the circuit, current density in the circuit, now varies not like this, which is an ideal, but as a function of your resistance, which is Rp by Rs plus Rp times Js times exponential Q times V minus JRS by NKBT. Keep in mind here it is e power QV, exponential times QV. Now you have to subtract J times Rs. So the series resistance comes into picture, and that is something which keeps killing your device again and again. Okay, so the way you make the device, the way you handle the series resistance are very important. So this plus V by Rp minus JPH. JPH is this current through the, because of the photocurrent. Okay, JPH. So for ideal diode case, you put Rs 0 and Rp to be infinity, then you end up getting the same, which is what you see here. Okay, so now we have discussed in detail what is parallel resistance. What is the reason for parallel resistance? One is the leakage across the PN junction around the edge, crystal defects, pinholes, impurity precipitates, and series resistance, which is result of bulk resistance of of your semiconductor. Sorry, bulk resistance of metal electrode and contact resistance between the semiconductor and metal. And this slide is specific to your PN junction solar cell. One can extend this to the other solar cell techniques, other solar cell devices. So a simple way of understanding this series resistance is when you talk about contact resistance between the semiconductor and metal. Now all the various other devices are multi-layered. So the resistance, contact resistance between these multi-layers play a crucial role in judging your series resistance. Okay, so how do I get all these things? Answer is simple. You have your JV curve. I'm sorry, why it is happening, I'm not sure. You have your JV curve, which you get from the experiment. You fit this J versus V. J and V are known. Js is also known for Rp and Rs. And you can, by fitting it, you end up getting the value of resistance and value of series resistance and your parallel resistance. And then you can use this to understand what could be the main thing. Now, one simple idea which you can get out of seeing your basic JV curve is how your fill factor is changing. Okay, so observing the fill factor changes in the JV curve helps you to follow the possibility of various device issues. Okay, normally Rp do not play a big role because the idea of Rp is you should reduce it from infinity to less. Okay, so you expect the Rp to be better. So normally you don't see a big change in the Rp unless it goes drastically low. The series resistance where you are, all your solar cells are now multi-layered solar cells. The way you make the layers, the way they are contacting each other. Okay, so these are the ones which start playing a serious role. And how do you see it? You see it from which part of this fill factor is actually getting deviated from your ideal behavior. So this is the ideal behavior. So if, for example, here Rs is 0, so it is here. Can you please mute someone who is speaking? Yeah, thank you. So now this Rs is 0, and as the Rs increases, small resistance changes because of your imperfect device packing can lead to shifting like this. You know, it starts becoming so this part of the solar cell fill factor starts deviating from the non-ideal case. Okay, so this is the point is happening. So this is going very fast, and typically your fill factor is killed mainly because of the way you pack your solar cell. So that is the main understanding you get from your JV curve. So simple, you know, solar simulator data is sufficient to actually figure out what could be the reason. As soon as you don't see a good thing, start playing with your device packing. The moment you get good device packing, slowly you will start seeing the improvement Okay. Of course, the VOC and JSC cannot be changed because of your device tracking. You can only play with the fill factor. The VOC and JSC requires some more things. VOC is something which you are fixed once you know your material characteristics, but the JSC or the short circuit current or the way the current is flowing in your circuit in your solar cell depends on the material property of your solar cell. How good is your material? How good is the the charge transport happening in the material? So these are the things which we will understand by understanding the material aspects of your absorber. Okay. Next comes the external quantum efficiency. Few of you have asked yesterday, so I just had a slide on this. It is also called as incident photon to electron conversion current efficiency. It determines how efficiently the incident photons can be converted to the electric current. So what does it mean? It is the ratio of number of charges collected by the number of incident photons. So simply put together, this is how it is. You collect your external quantum efficiency by doing an experiment where you have your solar cell device, you let it exposed to individual wavelength of the entire spectrum, white light spectrum, and you collect how much of photocurrent is coming out of this each current, each individual wavelength. So this is a plot between the current you get by the versus the spectrum or the wavelengths, and you do a little bit processing to get this eventual efficiency by doing a ratio that you can get anywhere. Any book can give you what it is, but the important point is it gives you a feel of which part of the spectrum is giving you the maximum photocurrent, which part of the spectrum gives the maximum current. So how do you know that? One simple way to understand which part of the spectrum would give you the best photocurrent can be understood from simply measuring your absorption. Okay, your absorber has to absorb some light in order to convert into photocurrent. So that should follow your absorption property of the absorber. Okay, so wherever it is absorbing, you should see some good EQE. Correct? This is the point about this figure. Okay, now it's very easy to do experiment if you have basic instruments in the lab. All you need is a white light source, a monochromator, which white light source is having all the spectrum. Monochromator is an instrument which can divide a white light source into single monochromatic wavelengths. So you get one color at a time. Okay, so you can just get one color at a time and put it on your eventual device. Okay, so you can have, what is the photocurrent coming out of this solar cell with respect to the light which falls on it. You will know, okay, this is something is missing here. The light should go there also. And you know how much of photocurrent you get from your reference diode. You know the properties of your reference diode. You know the quantum efficiency of the reference diode. Right? So when you know the quantum efficiency of the reference diode, and you know what is the photocurrent coming out of the reference diode, you equate that with the solar cell photocurrent and do the basic algebraic to get your actual external quantum efficiency. So simple, it's very easy. The only thing you require is to have a reference photodiode, which you know the quantum field. Again, any photodiode you buy should have its data sheets. In the data sheet, you will always have the quantum efficiency of that photodiode. Okay, so very easy and very simple to measure this EQE setup. Okay, this is what we have in our lab. We have developed our own EQE in the lab, and I just show the experiment which we have done sometime earlier, not now, but how a EQE should look like. This is the experiment of a PTHT PCBM organic solar cells. If you look at it, PCBM, as I mentioned yesterday, does not participate in the absorption. So it is only the PTHT or the polymer which does the absorption and converting into the photocurrent. If you look at it, this is the absorption of your PTHT with a maximum at 510, 530, and you see this EQE. You have the EQE which follows almost that of the absorption property of your polymer. Okay, one small thing which you should also keep in mind is that this is showing a higher EQE in terms of the when it goes to the UV. That is because it was found that PCBM has a small absorption, and also higher. It is also speculated that this energy from higher absorption, okay, higher energy photons, okay, which is the blue, is able to inject hot electrons because of which you were able to get extra carriers, and that is why you do have this kind of increase in the EQV in the region where even the absorption of the P3H is reduced. Okay, so this is a simple way of measuring your EQV. So even if you do not have your EQV setup, even if you don't have the EQV access to an EQV setup, you want to make a solar cell, it is sufficient to understand that it's sufficient to measure your absorption to at least predict where all I can get my efficiency. Okay, so why I'm saying it is, when I'll come to it also, that there is a possibility of adding a third component or a second component which can increase the absorption further, and so you can harvest light from various points, and one can look at in detail how the EQV can be enhanced. The EQV enhancement would directly reflect in the JV, your solar cell efficiency. Okay, one more thing which I would also mention is that you can integrate this EQ, you can integrate the photocurrent you get in your EQV experiment, and the whatever photocurrent you integrate and get at the end, adding all the photocurrent, it should be equal to your JSC. Okay, that is how you can make sure that your EQV measurement is same as what you measure in your solar simulator. Okay, now those two are the basic electrical characterization you need to do to at least know how good is the solar cell or how good is the device you make. Now, can we do anything without even touching these things? What is a simple example of it? It is, and your LED is the example of your electrolysis. What you get out of it is because of the electrolysis from the setup, from your device. Okay, so solar cell is a diode which absorbs the light. Solar cell is a diode which absorbs the light, converts into electricity. LED is a device which takes in the electric current and gives out the output, which is light. Okay, so both are one end same from a reverse point of view. So there is something called reciprocity theorem, which says that there is a reciprocity between the photovoltaic quantum efficiency and the electroluminescence spectrum of a PN junction diode. So this paper, probably I'll send you in the evening, gives just the derivation for this reciprocity theorem. Okay, it simply says that if you put a solar cell under illumination, you end up getting a current output. So you get some voltage. If you apply similar voltage when you apply similar voltage, you should get the output. So here light is the input, voltage is the output. In the second case, voltage is the input, light is the output. Okay, so all the detailed balance relationships are developed by Van Roosberg and Stockley, as well as Donald-Otto theorem. Okay, so light absorption to radio recombination, electron injection to electron connection. All these things happen, and these are all reciprocal. So why I'm saying that is that if you know your device, if you know the material of the device and you know the emission of the device, you know this is the emission from the device, okay, from the absorber. To check whether your absorber remained the same after you make the device and after you use the device for some point of time, all you need to do is connect the bias and look at the emission coming out of it. If the emission is similar to what you have given inside, what you expect from the PLM photoluminescence, it tells you that okay, your device is working well. Okay, why I'm spending so much time in this is a most common technique to study the large modules. When you import a large module, okay, how do you test whether the module is working or not? You don't measure the JV characteristics of every small individual component in the series. Okay, a module is a series of solar cells. Each solar cell is small area, correct? Because that's how it is, right? You want to reduce the resistance, so area is supposed to be small. So your big module has lot of solar cells connected in series. So how can you do the JV characteristics of each? It's impossible. So simplest way is to bias the two ends of the terminals of the module and look at the output. So this is the simplest example I can talk about it. So normally a setup looks like this. You have a big module which is here. You connect it to two ends of it and visualize it with a CCD camera in a dark room. Okay. So this is an example of how solar cells and wafers are studied. If you look at it, this is the expected photoluminescence, and if you look at the electroluminescence from this point, the light which is supposed to come here is dark. Okay, so you see there are some dark regions. Of course, this dark regions are the fingers or the electrodes. Obviously, you don't see anything there. They are the electrodes of the panel. But then you can always look at some dark regions Okay, this region, this region, this region. So these are the regions which are showing low electroluminescence, meaning to say that the cells which make up this small area of the entire modules have gone bad, and things which you don't see anything like this dark spot here or this, in fact here you don't see any light, these are all the things where the cells have already damaged. Okay, and that's how one can do a visual inspection of how good the device is. Electroluminescence is one of the best way. In fact, this electroluminescence can be always used to study your material aspect of your devices, even when you look at the lab scale devices. Okay. Now let us start working with few live examples and tell you how each of this work involved some characterizations. So as we go along this description of this work, you will also get introduced to various experimental techniques to target each and every aspects of this work. Okay, so here I am presenting our recent work on this rare earth doped photoanode for organic molecule based solar cell devices. In fact, we tried to dope neodymium into titanium. Okay, and this is a paper which is published in 2021, which is latest one. So someone was asking yesterday, how do we make a paper out of the solar cell? So this gives you an answer, and also it tells you what all things which one needs to do in order to finally come to your eventual JV data, and you say this is the reason why I am having good solar cell performance. Okay, so please pay attention, and things will be very easy. Okay, so TiO2 is as a photoanode is something which we all understand now from yesterday's discussion. Okay, so it has favorable position of the conduction band, wide band gap. It has relatively low fabrication cost, found to be very stable, having very stable electrical resistance states, very high electron diffusion, electron diffusibility. So all these things are well known about titania, and they have been used for photoanode applications. Not just in solar cells, it is used in various devices. Okay, this is a dye sensor solar cell. This is your quantum dot solar cell. This is your water splitting. Okay, your hybrid perovskite, which is the perovskite based on perovskite solar cells, and also you can use this titania as a electron transport layer for their organic solar cells. So it has been well exploited everywhere. So we thought, why not try to change the property of the titania and see how we can improve its functionality, and test it with one of the easiest solar cell we can make in the lab, which is the dye-sensitized solar cell. This is the point of our motivation of this work. And to begin with, what are the main limitations of the titania metal oxide? It is the first is the presence of high density of electronic trap states lying below the conduction band. What are the trap states? Any state that would eat up your electrons and not let the electrons go to the electrode. That is the simplest way of telling your traps. And also it has large band gap of the large band gap of titania allows absorption only in the UV region. Okay, so absorption in the visible region can be improved by dye sensitization, which is what you do in the dye sensor solar cells, and also you can dope with some elements which have absorption in the visible. For example, your rare earth. Okay, rare earths are the lanthanides which are known to have colors, known to color in the visible. And it is not something which are being explored now. Rare earths have been doped in glasses decades, centuries ago. And if you go to some nice old churches in Europe or some countries, you will see those rare earth doped titania, rare earth doped glasses giving beautiful colors. Okay, so color rare earths have been used, has been exploited quite very variedly in various applications. Okay. So we just thought, why don't we try with this titania? In fact, there are works on titania, but then all the works which are presented till now, at least based on the AD, are very limited to 1 or 2 measurements. So this paper, what we addressed is, we try to do all that can be required, all that is required to address to understand why your titania, when doped with rare earth, has improved its properties. Okay, so let's go about it. First thing is, upon rare earth doping with titania, you introduced surface trapping strips. Okay, it is similar to what you dope in your silicon. Okay, you dope with Nd. Nd has a separate, it has its own ionic stage, which is different to titanium, and that would lead to some changes, which we see in the next slides. So important point here is that it introduces
surface trapping states, reducing charge recombination, and has its own intrinsic 4f orbital transitions, which allows further absorption to this. This is the main idea of what could happen when you dope with titanium with Nd. Okay, so the devices are made like this. The titania is the Nd is doped in titanium using ball milling synthesis. NDO, titanium dioxide, is ball milled together to give you this, and then the process which we followed is similar to exactly what was discussed in the yesterday's afternoon demonstration. You make the fill, you make the paste. Okay, from the paste you make the you deposit using the Doppler plate. From then you put quantum dot for quantum dot solar cell, or you deposit dye by putting in the dye solution and washing it after 24 hours. So the idea is same. Okay, just I thought we'll show you a simple flow chart to see how it goes about it. Okay, important aspect about making the film, making this paste is that you should at least have annealing temperature of 200 degrees, and once you anneal, you should work properly. Okay. Yeah. The first thing is we understand how to use various physical characterization techniques with respect to NdTiO2, and these techniques are universal for any material system which we cover. First is the X-ray diffraction. So this is the simplest one can think of when you want to look at the crystallinity of the material, and also this particular technique helps you to understand if I dope something, did it actually sit inside the lattice or no. Okay, it can happen that titania is there on top of the neodymium is deposited on top of the titanium which is getting into the lattice. We want it to be doped into the lattice so that the presence of Nd or the presence of any dopant would change the properties of the material. So we wanted to look at it, and that's where we looked at how by making small doping variations like from 0.2 to 0.5, how the X-ray properties are changing, XRD image reflections are changing, and indeed we find that as you increase the dopant concentrations, the overall X-ray diffraction structure doesn't change. The spectrum looks the same, XRD spectrum looks the same, just that there is a slight shift in the strongest pattern which you see here at 101 reflection, and that small reflection, the change could be understood by considering that there is a large ionic radius of neodymium entering into the titania lattice, and few of the lower ionic radii of titania is replaced. Okay, because of which there is a strain induced inside the lattice structure, which would lead to a small change or the deviation from the actual reflection. But then keep in mind, unless you see some new peaks correspond to NdO2, neodymium dioxide, which is a precursor, okay, you can say that it remains the same. The purity of the phase purity of the titanium remains the same. Okay, so in fact we see that if you go beyond 0.5, if you go 0.6 and above, if you go to 1 point, let's say 1%, it has changed the entire structure. Okay, so the change in the crystallinity induces a strain in the host compound. So one of the simplest points one you should remember is, as soon as you make a material, get the XRD pattern checked to make sure whether your material is what you expect it to be. Okay, then you can use this so-called Williamson-Hall plot. Okay, any paper or any book, any literature which talks about XRD will tell you how to use this plot to characterize your size and strain. Okay, so this is the equation which is used. You can convert this X-ray pattern into P cos theta versus 4 sin theta data. And what we observed from this analysis is that Nd has strong hybridization with oxides compared with titania, so it restricts the titania crystal growth. Small grains can decrease the disorderness in the compound, so the strain also gets decreased from the activation of disorderness compared to higher grain size strains. Now, why we are so worried about strains is that when you talk about these nanoparticles, eventually the conduction has to go from 1 nanoparticle to 1 nanoparticle, so the grain boundary plays a strong role in the actual carrier transport. Okay, so the lesser the disorderness you introduce in the system, you try to reduce the disorderness in the system, the better it is for your charge transport. And also, because of this reason, the doping of Nd is expected to reduce the crystal growth, and that's why you see the reduction in the size as you increase the Nd concentration. So this is the idea of how the doping has changed the nanoparticle size and the strain from simple XRD measurements. Then comes how it is affecting your band gap. How is it affecting your band gap? You take your absorption measurements. Okay, this is the absorption. You take absorption or transmission, doesn't matter, because these are all powder form. We have taken this diffuse reflectance spectra, DRS mode. Okay, and then important point to understand, to visualize, is that when you start looking in the visible region, you observe the small peaks which correspond to the neodymium, which says that the neodymium is indeed allowing your material to absorb in the region where your pure titanium doesn't absorb. Okay, so they should have a change in the band gap. How do you actually calculate the band gap? That is by using your top plot. Okay, top plot looks like this. You alpha h nu power half times h nu time in terms of the photon energy. Okay, so you get a plot like this. You do the linear, you fit linearly the linear part of this curve, and the point where this, when you extrapolate the linear fit, the point where it hits the x-axis is your band gap. So that is how you can calculate your band gap, and we obtain the band gap, which is slightly reduced with the increase in the doping. And it is not that it is changing drastically, but there is a small reduction in the band gap because of your doping. Okay, but important then, along with this, another important aspect which we observed is the so-called Urbach energy tail. Urbach energy tail talks about everything that goes beyond the linear region. Okay, this region. Okay, if you look at it carefully, the region which is non-linear has a nice Gaussian slope. Okay, so how do you define this Urbach energy? This is how it is: the alpha equal to alpha naught exponential h nu by EU. Alpha is the absorption coefficient. Alpha naught is the constant and represents the structural disorder in the host materials due to low crystallinity, trapping states, surface defects, and electron photon interaction. And h nu is the photon energy. Okay, and then this, when you fit the curve with this equation, you get EU. Okay, you get this U because what I'm saying is you are fitting the exponential part of the curve, and when you fit it, you end up getting the EU, which is the Urbach energy, and you see that this Urbach energy is increasing with increased doping. Okay, so it gives you a feel of how the disorderedness is changing upon doping. Okay, so Urbach tails are very important to understand whenever you have composite materials with multiple dopants. So that is the point about how the dopant has impacted the crystal electronic structure. So the first one is XRD talks to you about the crystal structure. Absorption talks to you about the electronic structure. Okay, from the Urbach energies. Now we see how this dopant has changed the electrical properties. For that we measure this dielectric properties. So dielectric spectroscopy measures the dielectric property of a medium as a function of frequency. It is based on the interaction of an external field with electric dipole moment of a sample, often expressed by permittivity. Okay, what we measure is an impedance. Impedance is the opposition of the flow of alternating current, which is in a complex system. So this is the what you expect out of it from your dielectric measurements. You get your dielectric constant, which is epsilon prime plus I times epsilon double prime. Okay, a dielectric permittivity spectrum over a wide range of frequencies, what is shown here. The real and imaginary part of the permittivity are shown, and various processes are depicted. First one is the ionic and dipolar relaxation. So this is the ionic and dipolar relaxation for the real and imaginary part, and the further things are the atomic and electronic resonances, high energies. So if you look at it, till 10 power 9, you have this high frequency. After 10 power 9, you talk about micro frequency, and then you go into the infrared, visible, and UV vis. Okay. So as you increase the frequency, you start seeing it. Now the electric properties are sufficient as long as you see what happens in this region, because that gives a feel about how the photoconductor is changing at that frequency. Okay, so we collaborate with our colleague in IIT Hyderabad who has this instrument. We took the data, and important observations is what I'm showing here. Okay, another point which I want to emphasize here is that dielectric properties is simply measuring the capacitance. So you make a pellet of your powder, you make a pellet of your material. Here in this case we have used titania or ND doped titania powder. You made it into pellet, hardened into small tablet form, and deposited electrodes on either side and connected it. Okay, and then once the electrode is connected, you make it and start measuring the capacitance. That's the main aspect of looking at your dielectric spectroscopy. So what we obtained is the conductivity and resistance. Importantly, if you look at it, the conductivity as well as resistance changes as a function of frequency. It goes up as you increase the frequency. Importantly, if I compare, because I want to compare my, right now I want to optimize my titania with the best dopant concentration. I would like to optimize with the best dopant concentration as per the least conductivity, least resistance or highest conductivity. And if I look at it carefully, the black curve which talks about the conductivity change for the titania is lesser than the red curve which talks about the improved conductivity when you dope with 0.4 NdTi. The same thing with the resistance. Obviously it is opposite to that. Resistance is least when you have doped with 0.4 per mole percentage of Nd in titania. So this measurement gave us a understanding that I know now the right composition of my doped titania with NdDbm, which should have the good electric transport. Okay, so that way what happens, I am able to judge or predict that if I make a device with this material, I should get better performance with Nd.4 Tm. Correct? This is the point. So then now we start looking at how the devices can be studied as photoanodes. Now I am not getting into the photoanode, I am not getting into the actual devices. I want to understand how my NdTiO2 would behave as a photoanode. Okay, again, this is with respect to the solar dye-sensitive solar cell. So what we do is we study how the am I audible to all? Okay.
Yes,
how the photoanodes, when you sensitize the dye and the quantum dot would help you to really understand this. Okay. I'm sorry, just a minute. What we did is, the first thing is we do the photophysical characterization, which is the photoluminescence. What is photoluminescence? As I mentioned, it is a radiative recombination. When you excite any material, it goes to an excited state and relaxes to the ground state with emission of the emission, with the light emission. Okay, so one point which I should highlight is that when you have the dye and titania, we know that the dye is injecting into the electrons are injected into the titanium. So what happens is that following, when you excite the dye in the absence of titania, it should give the emission of all the population which has gone to the excited state coming down. So let's say 100 is the number of electrons which has gone up to an excited state of the dye. Upon photo excitation, all 100 should come down eventually, releasing 100 photons. Giving an example. So you should have a emission corresponding to the 100 photons, which is a strong emission. Now when you put this dye onto a titanium, what happens now is the dye has injected its electrons. Let's say the electron injection is fantastic, 90% injection, 95% injection. What does it imply? About out of 100, 95 electrons have gone into the titania. So only 5 electrons are living on the excited state of dye to relax down. So how does it impact? It impacts on your eventual reduction in the emission strength. Okay, so the moment you see a reduced emission, it gives an indication that there is a good electron injection. Okay, that's how you understand how a photoluminescence can be used to study the injection properties. A steady state luminescence, I don't say it is the right way, it is the final evidence, but it is the initial evidence. Okay, so here in this slide I explain you, I'm not showing the very big emission you get out of the titanium of the dye. I know that this dye, the dye we used is standard N719 dye. It is a ruthenium based dye, which I explained you yesterday with Nazruddin. Professor Nazruddin has obtained in his 1993 paper, which gave him the 10% efficient solar cell. Okay. Now, the point here is that this dye is well known, and we know that this dye, when you put on titanium, would give you a reduced emission. And this emission which I show is already all the dye can inject into the titanium. Okay. Now, if you look at it carefully, the best injection efficiency seems to be for the ND.4 TiO2 dye, correct? So it says that maybe upon doping, the rudium doping of the titanium, the dye is finding more sites to inject, and the injection efficiency at the dye titanium interface is more upon when you choose the doped titanium compared to the undoped titanium. Okay, so this is the dye film, and this is the PL film steady state, and we can also do the time result PL. Also, if you look at the time result PL, if you put the dye would have a long lifetime, which is all the time it takes for the 100 photons to come down, electrons to come down. Please don't take my 100 as a important number. I'm just giving you a number so that it is clear for quantitative purpose. Okay. Now, if you look at if there is an injection, then what happens? Only 5 is there, right? 95% efficiency which is started with. So only 5 would relax fast. So there will be a quick decay in the emission. So that you see is a faster time result emission. TRPL is fast here. So the TiO2 on dye film has a decay which shows like this. And moment you put this dye on doped TiO2, it has much faster injection. So this is how it is. So the injection, the time result PL data is also showing a faster injection of the tail states of the dye which is available after the injection. Okay, so luminescence is the next experiment one can do to understand how good is your charge generation. Okay, the same thing we did with the quantum dot solar cell. Okay, so we did both DSSC and quantum dot. The quantum dots you used here is the standard cadmium selenide, cadmium sulfate quantum dots. And again, this experiment shows you the same story. Titanium at CDS gives you an emission which looks like this, steady state emission. And when you put it on ND.4 doped titanium, this has the least emission. Okay, the same things to them. The same thing here. The result TRPL is faster for the doped titanium case. So these two experiments, this luminescence and time result luminescence, establish the point that if you have injection, you should have. If the injection is more, then you have more charge generation. If more charge generation, then you expect a higher photocurrent because more charges would go. Then now we are ready to start doing the JV characteristics. Okay, we are ready to do the solar simulation. So we are ready to put our device, make the device and put it into the solar simulator. Okay, this is how a compact device looks like that, and we put it under the solar simulator. And let's say I can play at fire. I see. This is where it is. Okay, I'm not able to play the video. Somehow Teams is not letting us play the video. I'm not sure why. So this particular figure, this particular device, this particular video should have told you how the device is actually performing as you take the solar cell. Okay. Now let us move further. Eventually this would have drawn one of these curves which I'm showing here, so you will not lose anything, don't worry. I thought I will be more dramatic by showing a video. I'm losing it, it's fine. Okay, so again, if you start looking at it, this is the JV characteristics of the dye sensitized solar cell. Okay, and this is the EQV of the dye sensitized solar cell. Again, if you compare that with the black curve, which is titanium dye, so with titanium dye, the black curve is somewhere here, and the best is the purple for ND.4 TiO2 when it comes to the JC, and also observe clearly the change in the fill factor. If you look at it, the fill factor is very good for. I'm sorry, this is showing there. It's supposed to show here. Okay, 0.4 is the place where you should highlight. Okay, this fill factor is 69.4, 0.5. Fill factor is also improving, which says that somehow this device is better packed, and also the device is allowing a faster injection that would somehow make sure that the electrons, the contact resistance is reduced. Okay, eventually what you see is increase in the GAC, which is what you expect. So GAC is more for ND.4 TiO2, 11.8. A fill factor is more, and that's how you see an increase in the efficiency as you see here. Okay, another point which I want to highlight is the increase in the EQV in this region between 600 to 700 region. This is the point where ND is also absorbing. So we also conclude that the doped titanium, which has increased absorption in the visible, also is contributing to the EQV of the solar cell. It's there for the quantum dot solar cell. I would like to make an excuse here. This solar cell is made just for a prototype, so we really didn't put any effort to make it the best. So you don't see that kind of high. Okay. Somehow both sides have made it. Both sides is a point. I've highlighted 0.3, but it's actually a 0.4 which is supposed to be highlighted. Okay. Again, you see there's an increase in the emission. Okay, in the output. Now one can do a electroimpedance spectroscopy to look at how the contact resistance is changing. This particular electroimpedance spectroscopy is something which an electrochemist would explain you better, so I will not deal with it at all. In fact, we haven't done it in our lab. We have requested our friend Praveen Beduri who helped us in this experiment. Okay, so what we have found is that, again, I'm highlighting the 0.3 for some reason. I'm sorry about it. Okay, is that the resistance is less for 0.4, 17 point. If you look at the R1, R2, R3. It is less here. In fact, R1 talks about the series resistance, R2 talks about the interface resistance, R3 talks about the recombination at the counter electrode, and all three it is best for the 0.4. And this is the reason why you expect the 0.4 to be the best for the both quantum dot as well as DSSC case. Okay. Now to summarize, what we have done in this work is I presented you a comprehensive picture correlating the physics of ND-doped TiO2 as photoanalytic for sensitized solar cells. Okay. The effect of ND-doped TiO2 in NATS is critically characterized using various techniques, and also the role of vacancies is established. I didn't touch upon the vacancy because there is another experiment which we did called XPS that takes a lot of time, so I didn't bother to explain here. It is understood that when the moment you change the property of the titanium, the vacancies will increase. What is the vacancy you're talking about? It is the oxygen vacancies which is happening. Okay. Now, importantly, the sensitized solar cell with 719 di as well as quantum dot gave you the best efficiency for the optimal doping. Enhancement is seen up to 30% for quantum dot and 16% for DSSC. So overall, what the message which I want to give in this particular talk is, what are the techniques which we have done to explain why our devices perform better. Okay, so this is one experiment which I'm talking about. This is second example again, which is the latest work 2021 paper which has come 1 month back. Okay, this we are talking about the bulk heterojunction solar cell, and here in this work we are focusing on how I have improved the efficiency by varying the morphology part. Now how does we change the morphology of the solar cell of your bulk heterojunction? By annealing it. Okay, so we try to heat up the active layer to a temperature slightly below that of the glass transition temperature of the material. So in the molten state, the molecule start rearranging itself so that it forms a better nanomorphology, and that would eventually lead to a better charge transfer. So in this work we have used this vacuum deposited small molecules. Okay, so these are the two molecules which you're talking about, DT-DCTB, a small molecule, and C70, a full ring molecule. So the absorption looks like this. This is a DT-DCTB and full ring. Now these are the two molecules which are co-evaporated in a vacuum chamber, thermally evaporated in a vacuum chamber fitted in a tube box. Okay, and upon annealing the thin film to 80 degrees, 100 degrees, 120 degrees, 140 degrees, you start observing the change in the roughness factor. Now, if you look at it carefully, the roughness factor seems to be the best for this 100 degrees compared to 140 and 120. In fact, 120 is very bad. 180, it has lot of depth, like lot of the morphology says that there is lot of valleys compared to the peak. Okay, and here if you look at the 140, everything is just molten and it is not at all good. So if you look at it, the variation of the valleys and peaks of the molecule of the surface morphology is best optimized for 100 degrees, and from this annealing we expect that the 100 degrees centigrade should give you a better device. We do start seeing that for the both the different thickness of the solar cells. Okay, so the best devices we got was for 100 degrees and from 100 degree annealing, and we look at the changes in the VOC, JSC, fill factor. Fill factors have gone up compared to that, and again if you look at it carefully, the fill factor has suffered a bit when we look at this part, which says that the resistance RS of the device is still poor. Okay, we are still trying to figure out why these devices are poor, but at least it gives you a feel that looking at the various variation of the fill factor. In fact, if you look at how the fill factor is changing with respect to unannealed. Unannealed is 26.7, okay, and as you increase the fill factor, as you increase the annealing part, it goes to a certain height and then it comes back. Okay, so fill factor changes along with the fill factor GAC changes and the VOC changes. So all these things would have a impact on the overall device performance. In fact, the best device we got for something which a small change in the device structure by increasing a buffer layer, we got up to 3.6%. Again, the highlight point is the change in the fill factor and the change in the GSC, and this is because of the better morphology. Now, is it all we can do? Can you do something else? Yes, you can always do an intensity dependent JV curve. You take your solar cell and change the intensity of your input light. Okay, one sun is 100 milliwatt per centimeter square, so you can reduce it or increase it higher and look at how the device is performing with different light bias with these different things. So in this figure I have taken, so we have taken the JSC and VOC and plotted as a function of the different input energies or input bias, intensity bias, and this particular plot is plotted with respect to the JSC, which is a function of P in times N S. Okay, P is the input intensity, and VOC is plotted as a function of KT by Q ln IPH by KPPH. Okay, there is a small analysis one needs to come to this point. Okay, I can show you the paper so you can look at it and understand. The important aspect here is the slope, S value in this current curve and slope in the VOC curve. Okay, so we observe that at 100-degree annealing, the S value is unity, it's almost 1. It is 1, indicating weak bimolecular recombination, while at other annealing temperatures there could be higher contribution of bimolecular recombination. So what is bimolecular recombination? Your electron is recombining with the whole of some other site. What it means is that if you talk monomolecular recombination is that you have a electron hole formed. Okay, the CG states are formed. After injection, just relaxes back. That is the monomolecular state reaction where they just recombine. It's a geminate recombination. Sorry, not monomolecular, geminate recombination. Bimolecular recombination is something where you have excess of charges which are generated. These excess of charges would start recombining because you have too many holes and too many electrons going around, which is what you see as you increase the intensity. On the other hand, if you look at the VOC at 100 degrees and 120 degrees, the values are near to 1. Okay, near to 1, indicating the reduced trap-assisted recombination within the device. On the other hand, while annealing at 130, poor devices are observed due to relatively high trap-assisted recombination. So that way, one can look at the recombination part of the device. So we can make one can understand how the traps are involved to hinder your charge transport, which would reduce your eventual JSC. Okay, so in a way what we did is we could anneal the device to reduce these traps, and by reducing these traps you could improve your solar cell characteristics. Okay, so these two experiments I thought I would explain you in detail. That way you have encountered various new methodologies to address why your solar cell is behaving better. Okay, I would just take 1 minute break and drink some water. If you have some questions, you may ask now. Otherwise, I'll continue before I go to the next part of it. Yeah, feel free to ask some questions if you have anything. No questions? How many of you are still there?
Hello, sir. I am audible.
Okay, let me start the next. I think either none of you are interested or you are out. Anyway, so let us start
Sir,
talking about
there are
how I
some
can use the
questions.
optical spectroscopy in order to start following the charge generation.
Hello, sir. Can you hear us? Hello.
We have seen this solar cell layout. I have discussed it yesterday. Let us see how each of this are, what kind of times it happens for all these things. The first light absorption is typically instantaneous. The charge generation happens between sub-picosecond to picosecond time scales. Again, keep in mind I'm talking about this organic solar cells. Next is the charge. So once the charges are generated, how long it would take to reach to the electrodes? That is a typical charge transport of viewport, and that is depending on the thickness, microseconds to few milliseconds. Okay. So various aspects happen at various time scales, and by using spectroscopy techniques, we can carefully understand, follow the various charges which are generated. You can start from the birth of the charges, which is the charge generation, till it reaches the electrodes. Everything can be really studied properly using various optical spectroscopy techniques. Okay. Again, what are the two important aspects about this organic solar cell? Organic solar cells, perovskite solar cells. Simply, the excitonic solar cells is the excitons and the interface. Okay, why? Because you need an interface to dissociate your excitons. Why? Why do you so? Because the exciton binding energy in organic solar cells are typically termed as the Frenkel excitons, and they have high binding energy. And it is important that there must be a heterojunction to break up the excitons into individual charges. Okay, so one of the points which I would like to stress here is that the exciton dissociation is very crucial, and it is found that for some systems it happens less than 150 seconds. So what is the need for optical spectroscopy? One is it aids in understanding two key kinetic competitions which can limit the efficiency of charge separation, thereby device performance. Okay, electron injection versus excited state decay to the ground, dye regeneration versus the electron recombination. So these things I've explained to you also yesterday, so you know what it is. Therefore, it is important to consider the impact of materials and device design upon these kinetics, and furthermore, the lessons which we can learn from such kinetic studies for future material optimization would help you a long way to predict what kind of materials you can use for your solar cells. Why it is such an important aspect here is that not every group makes devices. Okay? There are groups like chemists who make molecules. There are groups who make only devices. There are groups who have no idea of molecules. They are okay making devices. There are a lot of people are around. A lot of different groups with different backgrounds are into this field. Now, how can they get the inputs to know whether they are in the right direction or not? So, for such inputs, optical spectroscopy gives a very good indication. Okay, so these are the various techniques that are involved: absorption, fluorescence, steady state. I have explained in the earlier two examples how one can use these techniques to really understand what to predict from your system. Then you have this quasi-steady and transient techniques: CW photoinduced absorption, flash photolysis, 50-second transient absorption spectroscopy. These are the various time resolved spectroscopy techniques which are used. Then you have time resolved photoluminescence spectroscopy. In fact, I have explained you already the time resolved PL studies in DSSC to tell you how the injection is happening and how, looking at the injection time scales, one can predict the efficiency of the injection. Apart from that, there are other important techniques like electroluminescence, field induced studies. We will not touch upon that right now. I would stick to this part. What is PL quenching? As a rule of thumb, better quenching seen in steady state PL indicates lower radiative decay rate and hence better electron injection. Though PL quench always necessarily means better photocurrent. Okay, this is something which please understand. Injection doesn't lead to better photocurrent because photocurrent also relies on the charge transport characteristics, the conductivity of your materials, the mobility of your charge carriers in your eventual device or your in your device or your absorber. Okay. However, this trick is valid only for those stages which has radiative recombination and you have always losses due to other decay channels. So take it with a pinch of salt. If you have the experiment, you see some quenching, be happy, move forward. Okay. So this is the point which I'm talking about. if this is a P3ST titanium, P3ST PCBM, okay, if you look at the way the P3ST PCBM emission has quenched compared to PCBM, we have almost 90%. So it says that you can have more than 90% of electron injection happening, and that is why I could simply safely use my terminology of 190, 95, because these are the kind of injections we see often. Next comes the quasi-steady state or transit techniques, where I would like to focus on the other two, CWPIA and 2 second. Simply because laser flash photolysis is little high intense laser which is used, and there are, even though experiments show some data between nanosecond to microsecond, flash photolysis is not something which people routinely use to characterize their solar cell materials. Okay. But there are ways to integrate this guy and this guy so that we know what happens between these time scales. Okay, so I take a quick detour, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, because we had too much of solar cells. Let me talk about some optics. What is the intuitive feeling for using the transit techniques? Okay. This is a mid-19th century painting, and if you look at it, it is painted by the artist Carl Friedrich Agard, and he has drawn a picture of steeplechase. What is steeplechase? These horses should run and they should jump across the various barricades. It's a jumping game, it's a race, steeplechase. You all know about it. Now there is a serious issue with this painting. Take 2 seconds and see. I'll come back to it. What is the problem in it? In case someone knows, quickly tell me, otherwise I'll go further. Okay, so the main aspect about this figure is that it is done in mid-19th century, which was before the photograph is invented, and as per the artist's visualization of how the horse jumps, these horses are all painted with the hoofs pointing outwards. Okay, hoof is here and this here. Okay, if I can get my laser pointer so that I can get this guy and this guy are away from each other, and you see that all 4 are in the air. So there are 2 questions which were really bothering those guys those days. What is the aerial phase of a galloping horse? The question is, do all 4 hoofs of the galloping horse ever live simultaneously the ground? Okay, so this is how one would expect the question to be. Would it be like this or like this? Okay. Are they away from each other or pointing each other? Right? So this is something which people were bothered earlier, and the first fast photography was invented to answer that question. So this is the time resolution of 1/60 of the second, which was obtained by doing the strobe photography. Right now we all are having this flash camera sports mode, which does this kind of fast clicking. So you can click a fast running sprinter frame by frame because of your shutter speed, and the main background for the science behind that shutter speed came up with this kind of experiments which was done those days. Okay, so this is strobe photography, which says that there is some events, some moments in the galloping horse stages where all the 4 hoofs leave the ground. Okay, but then they are never pointing outside. Okay, every time the hoofs are pointing outwards, one of the hoof is always touch the ground, but in the aerial phase, when all the 4 hoofs are away up in the air, they are facing each other. And again, if you look at it, it's pretty intuitive, because if the horse doesn't do it, it will fall because of lack of balance. Okay, so well, that is a natural part of it, but then it was found that yes, the same flash photography, freezing in motion, is common for all the mammals, and in fact all mammals jump the same way, run the same way. So the important aspect which I want to highlight in this figures is not the pig or the horse. The aspect is to capture a snapshot of a fast event or a short time duration, one needs to have a probe that is faster than that event. So as a fun fact, this is not universal for all mammals. It was found that this is not so for the elephant. In fact, There's a Nature paper published in 2003 which says that even though elephants run fast, they go achieve high speeds, there is never a case where all the 4 hooves of the elephants are in the air. Okay, again, it is an experiment which they have done to say that what people have done here is not always universal, and that is the fun part of it. Let us move further. Okay, so the message here is that the observation time should be greater than that of the typical phenomena of the time scale. Okay, this is the figure. There's a picture which is taken with large exposure time in a busy traffic range, where you see that the motion of the various vehicles is not captured, only the trace of the light that leaves is captured because it's a long exposure time. Or in other words, what it means is that if you start observing any phenomena at much larger time scales than what it is happening, they tend to get, blurred out. Okay. And you'll not see it. They get integrated and get averaged out. You'll not see it. This is how one can see what happens when you have a exposure with long time scale. And this is the photograph which talks about how if you have a camera which is fast, and it can be faster. You can see the measurements. Okay. The strobe light photography is a time resolution of a few microseconds, and you can see it. So the conclusion is, in order to measure an event, you need a shorter one. So how can such short event can be made? And therefore, it is important to understand how the timing can be controlled. So timing matters. Okay. And the simplest example in an optical spectroscopy term is your pump probe measurements. In fact, this has been used from many years, and I will just quickly present what it is. Just to get a feel of the time scales, this is the time of the age of the universe, 10^18. This is the camera flash which I just mentioned, 1 millisecond. Okay, we can feel up to 1 millisecond and less than that. Below that we cannot feel it, but your computer clock cycle is in picoseconds or in gigahertz, which is in 10^-9 nanoseconds. Okay, and this is why you can do, your computer can work faster. A lot of things are happening. Even you just click it and things are happening because of its computer speed. And what we are interested is the picosecond and femtosecond, because this is the time where the most of the photo processes, electronic, the chemical reactions are happening. And this is very interesting to understand. Okay, so the concept remains the same. Your Beer-Lambert law is important. Okay, the aspect here is that the pump probe measurement measures the transmission of the probe in the presence of light and in the absence of light. So this delta T by T gives you an information about how I can understand my excited state process. Don't worry if it is too much for you. It is simple to understand that a pump probe measurement is a function of the spectrum at which you are probing and also the time at which you are probing. So once you excite a sample, you can probe with various time scales, and at different time scales, the way the system evolves can be really captured using this experiment. Okay, a CW photo-induced experiment is simple. Here you don't have a femtosecond laser. You just start with a CW laser. All you do is you chop with a chopper and you measure the variation in the excited state as a function of the chopping frequency. Okay, the typical time scales probed here is in microsecond to millisecond, mostly limited by the chopper. Okay, you get to see what is triplet states, long-lived charges. Once the charges are trapped, you will get to see how much of charges are trapped. So all these things are sufficient to understand from the CW emission. The technique is most useful to screen many materials that may be used as a sensitizer by simply looking at the presence of long-lived charges in device configuration, therefore saving lot of time and effort in fabricating and optimizing the device with suitable material combinations. Okay, so this is the simple example of how a CW photo-induced absorption looks like for a T3STP CPM. If you look at it, this is happening at a long time scales in millisecond time scales, and the negative data you're going to see is the absorption of the charges which are surviving after few milliseconds. Meaning, once you generate charge in your P3STP CPM blend, it is staying without recombining. When it doesn't recombine in your thin film, if you put an electrode, these charges which do not recombine go to the electrode and they generate the current. Okay, they participate in the photocurrent. So one can look at how the charge band is changing over the period of time by doing this kind of transient absorption techniques. On the other hand, Let me just spend one more time on pump probe technique. You have the sample, you come with a probe which is a short pulse, and you probe with another short pulse such that what you measure in the detector is delta T by T, which is the transmission of the probe through the sample in the presence of pump. Okay, now you turn off the pump and the transmission of the probe without the pump. What is the transmission of the probe without the pump? It is a simple ground state absorption. Okay, and what happens here is what happens to the probe absorption when it goes to the excited state. So this is how one can look at it to understand. So this is pump probe tells you the impulse response of the medium, and it gives you the output of the pump probe experiment, gives you the pump induced variation of probe energy, and the convolution of system requires the cross correlation of pump and probe to be same. Okay, so you have to have short pulses, and if you have any long pulse, all the dynamic processes within the cross correlation terms are averaged out. This is similar to what I explained to you in the picture of a long exposure figure photograph of a traffic. Okay, now how do we explain from the context of your organic molecules? You know, for every molecule you have certain ground state absorption and you have certain emission properties. Correct? You know these two. When you excite with the pump, which is in the middle of which is the actual absorption maximum of it, what you ensure is the ground state is the population of the ground state is taken into the excited state. So here, this is what I'm showing. You excite and you take the population of the ground state to the excited state. Next, you come with a probe, which is broadband, but you delay the probe. How much you delay? You delay the probe and you start seeing how the probe would behave as a function of how the transmission will behave as a function of the spectrum. The first thing is, let us look at the area spectral region of the probe which matches the ground state absorption. Now when this whitelet comes and interrogates this material system, it sees that this particular small region of the spectrum, which corresponds to the ground state absorption of this molecule, doesn't see any population in the ground state. So it thinks that this particular thing doesn't see any population, which means there's nothing to absorb, so it gets transmitted. On the other hand, when you put off the light, what happens when you put off the light, which is the case of pump off? There is population in the ground state, so there is an absorption event happening. Okay, and so when you do the delta T by T, transmission in the presence of pump minus the transmission in the presence of probe, obviously the transmission in the presence of pump would be higher than that of probe, higher than that of pump off, because pump off, it is absorption which is positive, which is reduced transmission, and therefore the delta T by T should be a positive quantity, and that's what we talk about as a photo breach. The next is the photoluminescence. Now you know photoluminescence, emission is coming out, so there is an emission from the excited state. So it is equivalent to a stimulated emission process in any two-level system, and that would lead to an emission of extra photon in addition to this input photon, resulting in an extra positive signal, which you call it as the stimulated emission. Now comes the excited state, which is what we are doing this experiment for. This is something which I am doing as a demonstrative purpose, but you can have this excited state absorption or the absorption of this excited state anywhere in the entire spectrum. Here I am just showing what happens in this region, which is complementary to these two. Now this particular excited state, which now has which now has population because of this transfer, okay, from the ground state to the excited state, can absorb light. That corresponds to the absorption property of this. And let's say this absorption of this property of this absorption of this excited state is here. Then in the presence of light, in the presence of pump, this guy starts absorbing and going to an excited state. So the transmission is reduced. On the other hand, when you go with the probe without the pump, what happens? Population in the ground state. So there is no population here. Therefore, you would have a higher transmission in the absence of pump. Resultingly, you have a negative photoinduced absorption. So this is how one can observe the photoinduced absorption signal. So anything that an excited state is doing will give you the photo processes, and following this photoinduced absorption, it can be various things which can happen once the excited state is populated. Following that, time scales will give you the information about what is happening to the population in the excited state. Okay. So this is the main point. there are experiments. You can do it in delta T by T, which is transmission. You can also do it in delta A, which is inverse of it, where you're talking about the absorption. So in that case, this PA band is higher. It's in positive, just a reversal of the direct of the thing. Okay. Now in a very simple scenario of organic molecules, once population go to excited state, it can do a singlet transition, go to an excited state. It can do an intersystem crossing, get to the triplet states. Okay. Those who are in the field of chemistry would know these things. Those who do not know, don't worry. It is another excited state process, or it can give away its electron, becomes a charged quantity, okay, which is what happens in your solar cell. It injects an electron. By losing its electron, it becomes oxidized species. Now it's a charged molecule. This charged molecule would have its own absorption, and this absorption is what you see as a photoinduced absorption of that charged molecule. So if I can identify this charged molecule or the signature of this charged species, I can follow the time scale of this and find out how the charges are generated and how the charges are dying down with time. Okay, so again, 2 case studies. I have how much time I have? I have about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, so I'll try to finish it before that. First case study is how to understand this in a bulk heterojunction solar cell. This I have explained to you again everything yesterday. Important point is that once the charge transfer state is formed, we need to see how the charges decompose. So you want the charges to go on, we don't want any recombination. That's the main point here. Okay, so one of earliest experiment to exploit this comprobe is in 2001. Okay, by this group, Giulio Cirillo and Saiz Fitzi. Okay, now this is the first paper which says how fast the electron injection happens from a P3ST, from a polymer fullerene blend. Okay, in fact, this experiment tells you that the injection is happening within the injection. If you look at this data, this is the photoinduced absorption band which is here, and it is decaying with time, as you see here. As I mentioned, those who are not in the field, don't worry about this positive signal, negative signal. Just follow what I'm saying. This negative band is what is there. So it starts from 15 femtoseconds and you go down. As you go down the delay, this is the CW, which is fast, long time scales where the actual charges are surviving. And so if you look at it, this band starts from this point and slowly grows. If you look at it, it has grown by 100 femtoseconds. This entire band is grown, and once the band has grown, this remains as it is all the way from 100 femtosecond to few milliseconds, which is the CW photoinduced absorption data. So it says that my charges are formed in 100 femtoseconds and it stays without getting decomposed, without getting recombined, suggesting that I have excellent charge generation and good. My blend can hold on to the charges without having any traps, without getting recombination, without getting recombining, such that I can extract these charges for my solar cell. The time by, this is an experiment observation. This is the fitting data. The fit data tells you that for this particular material, a combination of MDMO, PPV, and PCBM, the injection is happening within 45 milliseconds. It's very, very fast. Okay. We have done some more works on this, so let me skip that point, doesn't matter. Let us get to the PV examples. Okay, the first experiment is which I want to show you is why this polymer on titanium never worked. Yesterday I touched upon this material and said that it didn't work. You could not get more than 2% efficient. Why? Because of this. It was found that low power conversion efficiency, inefficient photoinduced absorption at the polymer metal oxide interface. So you take a system which is polymer with titanium and do the pump probe. What happens is, this is the pump probe measurements at different time scales, 200 femtosecond to 100 picosecond. What is observed is the photoinduced bleach, which corresponds to the absorption of the material. Nothing great about it. Next is the absorption, photoinduced absorption, which is the excitation from the ground state from X1 to Sn, which is also expected. But what is important is the stimulated emission. Now, if you look at the stimulated emission, if you understood my earlier discussion of if there is an injection from then excited state to the titanium, the number of population in the excited state come down drastically because of the electron injection, which means that the emission should get quenched. But if you start seeing emission, which is a direct proof that injection is not efficient. And in fact, the very reason why you see this stimulated emission tells you that the injection from the polymer to the titanium is very bad, which is why you don't have sufficient charge carriers which are injected, and that is why the efficiency is very low. Okay, so there's one strategy which we could think of. In this paper, we presented that we coated with C60 layer. Now we know that a polymer on C60 would always give good injection, and immediately if you look at that point, you start seeing this quench stimulated emission, suggesting that there is faster electron injection happening, efficient electron injection happening, because of which there is a possibility of solar cell developing there. In fact, you can start seeing a new band appearing for this situation, which correspond to the band of the charges, and that is where, in fact, the solar cell made with this device gave us 3% efficiency. Furthermore, you could do more additive things and simply kill the entire simulated emission, and you make sure that charges which are generated are long-lived, and long-lived charge band suggests you that more charges are surviving over the period of time when you can extract. And this is another example to tell you how a pump probe experiment helps you to understand charge generation and follow the charges for long time scales and predict that moment you put your electrode, I have better chance of taking out the charges and finally getting the photon. Okay. Now I would talk about another system which is a triple system. There's a ternary part. You know, this particular example is taken to explain you how I can use my EQV idea to increase the absorption throughout the spectral region and obtain better solar cell performance. This paper is in 2014. It's a solar energy material paper again. Okay. Now we are taking a PTHD PCBM, which is well known bulk heterojunction material, and put a small quantity of this molecule QPT and see how the introduction to the third system would show you improvement in the solar cell performance. Now this is the steady state properties. The absorption of this third component is somewhere here, it's 700. And in fact, if you look at this PTHD PCBM, the PTHD PCBM blend doesn't absorb anything beyond 650. Now this molecule QPT is absorbing after 650. So this is chosen such that the blend of polymer PCBM and the QPT increases the absorption from the visible all the way till 800 nanometers. Okay, so you are gaining 150 nanometers of more absorption region, so you can harvest more and you expect a better solar cell performance. Okay. Important point here, what we saw is that this polymer, the PCBM, which is found to only absorb in the visible, in the UV ultraviolet, was mute in terms of solar cell performance because our solar simulator typically do not have any UV light. Why? Because we don't see it. We don't see it in the ground because of the ozone layer, and solar simulators are made sure that they don't have the kind of they maintain the same spectrum which you actually see in the ground on the ground. Okay, so the photons which are in the UV are lost out, small photons in the solar simulator or in the solar. Let's say some photons are coming out, and that is also can be harvested. How? PCBM is emitting in the region where the QPT is absorbing. So one can say that if I have my solar light in the 400 region where the PCBM is absorbing, I should be able to increase the EQV because it should absorb the light, do the down conversion. Okay, how is down conversion? It would give away its energy to the QPT. Now QPT should get excited from that and get excited and do further process. So overall, the spectral overlap of emission band of PCBM suggests that there is a possibility of resonant energy transfer. Okay, so this is the various energy levels of it. I explained to you earlier. You require this kind of cascading structure for electron injection and cold transfer, and the material is chosen such that this kind follows. Okay, the energetic gap between LUMO of PTHD and QPT suggests a possible electron transfer from PTHD to QPT. QPT is a known hole transport material, and so once the hole is formed in QPT, it would transport faster. Okay. I want to bring out the aspect of EQV here. As I mentioned to you, as we increase the QPT concentration, you look at it here. This black one talks about the EQV of the PTHD PCBM. Okay. Now, as you increase the QPT concentration, see what happens. There is an increase in the EQV of the overall EQV. Apart from that, there is an increase in the small region where the P3H PCBM was not absorbing, but only the QBT is absorbing. So in this region where you don't expect any, that's what it is. That's 0 for 0 EQV from P3H PCBM and a finite EQV for the place where the QBT is absorbing. Not only this, you could also get an increase in the EQV between the 300 to 400 region where the PCBM is absorbing. So these are the things which you could observe by just looking at the EQV and seeing how, by addition, how I am using my various components to harness the light. The moment they harness the light, how they are contributing to the overall photon. Okay. This device results that obviously at a certain dopant concentration you have an improvement. Okay. Yeah, these are the things which you can do. You can do morphology study and other things. Importantly, we see that with a particular concentration, 200 nanometers thickness, 35% is improved for 0.3% weight percent, and for 150 nanometers, about 70% is observed for 1% QBT. Okay, so depending on the thickness of your active layer, the 3D morphology changes, and that's why the concentration of the third component also starts playing a role. What we know so much is that there is a change in the morphology, which is the film microstructure, as evidenced by the observed changes in the fill factor. Okay, this is the point here. Fill factor is changing. Okay, the moment you change, you see the fill factor improvement in the fill factor. It says that your charge transport is nice, right? That's the point here. And also from various studies of photoinduced absorption and other things, we could say that there is a good electron energy transfer from the PCBM to QBT, and then QBT is injecting further. Okay, so we wanted to look at how the energy transfer is possible by doing the comprobe measurement. Okay, the same story remains the same. The energy transfer can be understood and quantified by transient absorption studies. Thin films of PCBM with varying concentration of QBT in host matrix were deposited on fused silica substrate for various studies. Why it is deposited on PS matrices? PS is a polystyrene matrix. Is that PCBM doesn't, it doesn't inject into the polystyrene, but as you increase the quantity of the QBT, if there is any energy transfer from PCBM to QBT, you should start following it. Okay. In fact, this is what happens if you take PCBM only, meaning PCBM on polystyrene. This is how the pump probe looks like. If you take only QBT in polystyrene, this is how the pump probe looks like. Obviously, the positive is the photo bleach explained, which corresponds to the absorption of the PCBM. Here, this corresponds to the absorption of the QBT. Now, what is expected is that if there is a energy transfer, then you start seeing a reduction in this photo bleach for PCBM, reduction in the photo-induced absorption of the PCBM. At the same time, you should start seeing a growth in the photo bleach of your QBT. Why? Because QBT is getting more energy, more light energy to get excited, and you should start seeing that intensity changes in the QBT, which is what we start seeing it. Energy transfer from PCBM to QBT will result in abrupt decrease in the PV and PA of PCBM with simultaneous increase in the photo bleach of the QBT. Okay, which is what we see. This is a PCBM only with strong photo bleach. Okay, and this is QBT with reduced photo bleach from PCBM and increased bleach from the QBT. Okay, so both of this would give you an information about the thing, and we can look at the individual kinetics of the wavelengths. Okay, you see that there is an increase in the ground state bleach for QBT with time and decrease in the charge band, which is here. Okay. So a quick decrease in the 960 kinetics of QBT. Also, content increases the possible reduction in the charge species in PCBM due to fold transfer. Okay, so doing all these experiments, we could conclude this particular model, which is happening for this improved solar cell efficiency, which is you have only 0.3% of QBT, so 97% is your P3H PCBM. So the majority is the binary domain. So you have the injection from P3H to PCBM electron and hole injection from PCBM to P3H. But the effect of this QBT is that because QBT is there, it has lower HOMO-LUMO level compared to P3H. You have good injection of electron from P3H to QBT, and QBT along with QBT has a LUMO level which is matching with PCBM. So it would nicely come and go there. Okay, then the third one is the energy transfer of PCB into QPT, which means that the QPT is excited, photo excited, having its own exciton. Now, because of this cascading homolemals, there is a photo-induced pole transfer from QPT to QPT. So this is still not published. That particular comprobe measurements are not published. But the point is that you could do this optical spectroscopy studies to again visualize the growth, and you could track the generation and recombination of your charges and tell out what is it. Finally, I just stop my talk with this final result, which again came up this last year. Okay, this is a low-cost solar cell based on a dye which is used for kumkum production. It's a new Fuchsin dye. Okay, the dye molecular structure, when you put it in water, it gives you this color. Okay, so the way people have done is they use this 10 grams of dye in 1 kilogram of turmeric, and they grind it to get this maroon color of the kumkum. So this is one way of making kumkum. Other one is, you all know how to make the other side. Okay, the point is that this dye is taken off the shelf from the supermarket, so it costs 25 rupees per 10 grams, very cheap. And we started looking at how to use this dye for this solar cell application. So this is the absorption of the dye, this is the emission of the dye in solution. Okay. As I mentioned to you, if there is a sensitization of the dye on titania, and if there is a injection from dye to titania, it should result in a reduction in the photoluminescence. In fact, this is what you see when you put new Fuchsin on glass. This is the strong emission which you see. The moment you put it on titania, there is a quench of emission, which gives you a feel that yes, injection is possible here. But as I mentioned, this is only an evidence of injection. It is not the proof of injection. Okay. Next is the time resolved luminescence. Again, we see that when you put glass on titania or new Fuchsin on glass or FTO, it is a long lived, suggesting that this is the excited state lifetime of the new Fuchsin, which is in nanoseconds. And the moment you put it in titania, this guy quickly injects, and the quick reduction or quenching of the PL can be seen in the fast decay of the emission. Okay. So the numbers, but doesn't matter, you can see it visually. Finally, if we want to use this dye on titania for TSSC, you should use the components where the energetics should be matched. In fact, this is the point here. This dye is found to have the HOMO-LUMO level, which is here, LUMO of 3.4 and HOMO of 5.5. And this LUMO of the dye is higher than that of the conduction band of the titania. In fact, titania has higher conduction band compared to that of the FTO Fermi level, and so you have this kind of nice electron injection possible. Then we used the so-called ferrous liquid electrolyte, not the iodide liquid electrolyte, ferrous liquid electrolyte as a whole transport material for studying the overall picture. Okay. Next is to find the evidence of how injection is happening, how fast injection is happening. For that, we did the comprobe measurements. Again, don't worry about the whole story. Important point here is that following this stimulated emission process, if you look at the film, the stimulated emission is strong and it is long-lived. Within the first 10 picoseconds, it is there. But the moment you put it on titania, within the first 1 picosecond, this stimulated emission is quenching, suggesting that you have a electron injection which is happening within 2 picoseconds. Of course, we had a very noisy data, so we could not really fit the data, but I would expect it to be less than 1 picosecond. So this is the data which shows you that injection is fast. So now you have a dye which is very cheap, which you put it on titania, is found to be injecting, and it's a matter of we trying to optimize the device to get the efficiency. The first trial is with the iodide electrolyte, and this iodide electrolyte started showing some photo action, but the only problem is that the efficiency is 0.02%, and it was found this diodide is so corrosive that this dye is getting peeled off within no time. Therefore, we changed this iodide into a sulfur-based electrolyte, and this sodium sulfide is typically used for quantum dot solar cell applications. And by changing the electrolyte, we found that there is an increase in efficiency by 1 order, but still it is not perfect. What we did is we changed another electrolyte So this particular work suggests, okay, let's complete it. This electrolyte change Fe2 plus Fe3 plus gave an efficiency of now 2.88%, which is 2 orders more than what you expect with a simple iodine. Okay, now why I have showed you this particular figure is that this dye never worked with the standard technique which has been used. So we have tried to make the device with this iodide. It never worked, so we almost threw away this dye for 2 years. We didn't bother to check it out. Then we happened to get access to a pump probe measurement system. We did the pump probe. We found that injection is happening. Okay, so there is no problem of injection from the dye to titanium. There is something else which is happening within the device. So the only thing which is a part of a DSSC and which is not there in this tool, okay, is the liquid electrolyte. Okay, so titanium, dye are the two parts. The third part is the liquid electrolyte. So by changing the electrolyte, we thought we should play with it and get better efficiency. In fact, this is what it is. Even now, I think this device is not good because you see this kind of packing. The fill factor is very bad. Okay, but then the prototype is done and we published it. Work is going on to make this filter factor better. That is ongoing work still. Okay, so what is happening here is that we have used a dye which is very cheap compared to a standard ruthenium dye which is very expensive. You see 2.5 rupees per gram to 31,000 per gram. Okay, a counter electrode was used which is not platinum based. Platinum based counter electrode costs 300 rupees and a carbon fabric costs 1 rupee per centimeter square. And a liquid electrolyte used was KCl with ion, KCl solution, potassium chloride solution with Fe2 plus Fe3 plus redox coupling, which is cheap and non-toxic. And overall, this particular entire device started working in aqueous medium because this KCl solution is in water. Okay, we could come up with this low-cost green aqueous DSSC. The reason why I call it green is considering the environmental impact of this particular solar cell on the overall toxicity. Okay, so with this we have got a lot of media extensions, so I don't want to spend more time on this. People have liked it. Okay, so I would the message of the previous work is that one can do your device and see why it is working, or you can do various other works and find out there must be some way to make the device work. Okay, because the earlier work was important for one reason: it is cheap and Indian dye, and also it is somehow giving us the option of working with environmental friendly materials. Had we not done the pump probe measurement, we would not have come with the idea that electron injection is possible, and so we would not have made the device. So this is coming from the characterization to the device. In earlier cases, I showed you have good device and you do the characterization to explain why the device is working. Okay, so now I just finished my talk with a couple of slides on what are the ways to follow the charge recombination transport. Okay, there are things which I didn't explain carefully. This is a laser flash photoresist and photoinduced absorption. Another thing is the charge transport, time of flight measurement, charge excitation, extraction by linearly increasing voltage. So these are the various things which are existing, which can do the same experiment in long time scales, and one can look at the recombination dynamics. The longer the lifetime of the charge band, the lesser is the recombination, and so the better is the possibility of taking the data, extracting the charges into the. So this is a point here, and charge mobility studies I am not presenting at all because that would be somehow integrated to the next talk, which is the simulation which is happening in the afternoon. Okay, so this talk should lead to the next one, and that's why I just put this slide to say that charge mobility studies is also very important, and one needs to look at various ways to understand how the mobility of the carriers are changing with respect to your material system. Okay. So to summarize, I presented you the understanding of photoprocesses of donor acceptor interface is very crucial for the photo charge generation in organic solar cells, and optical spectroscopy provides a unique non-invasive tool to study this. Okay. And the overall summary of the entire presentation today is that we have discussed the various characterization techniques of solar cell devices. We explained ways to find out how good is your device. We discussed why your device behaves the way it is in terms of characterizing. Okay, what are the characterization we put? We used physical characterization, physical properties, electrical properties, optical properties. All three needs to be characterized simultaneously so that we get a complete understanding of how the absorber material will behave and how the solar cell would work once you make the device with this material. Then we taken various examples of solar cell devices and used various techniques to explain why a device worked the way it is. And this is the group I work with. I'm sure you have seen my website, but we do a lot of things. This is the last talk I'm giving, so I'm just doing a little bit of publicity here. Okay, we work on ultra-fast time result spectroscopy. We also look at the optical properties of the materials. We make various types of solar cells. Okay, and importantly, I would say that our group mainly focuses on the characterization of it, and our devices are mainly prototype to support our characterization. And this is where we have very good synergy with the IRCA group, because they are excellent in making devices, and we take their materials and we do characterization. Okay, having said this much, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm okay to take your questions now.
Sir?
Any more questions?
Sir, can you hear me? I think it's mute. Sir? I'm calling.
Sir, can you hear us?
Hello?
Sir, we are talking, but we are.
None of you are audible to me. Maybe you can just look at the meeting options. Maybe you can unmute everybody.
Yes, sir. It is unmute.
Maybe people can raise your hands and I'll see whether I can unmute them. Or you can use the WhatsApp to ask the questions. Why not? I don't know why you're all unmuted. Okay, one question I received is by Srinivasan. Does the high form factor or fill factor always results in high efficiency, or is it just one of the parameters to characterize the device performance? It is one of the parameters to characterize the device performance, because the VOC and JS is also important. The fill factor only tells you how good is your
Device.
Solar cell device fabrication. How is the resistance happening? What kind of resistance is there, and how good are you able to resolve your various resistance issues? But the JSE is what tells you how much of charges are actually going. Any more questions? Okay, before anybody asks question, let me continue this answer. Now there are two ways of looking at a solar cell. One, how much of charges are generated. Okay, so there are two possible things. One is that charges are not generated efficiently. Less number of charges are generated, so even though your device is good, less amount of charges reach the electrode, so your JS is less. The second case is the case where your device is good, your charge generation is good, and you have good transport in the device, therefore your efficiency is good. The third thing can happen also, your charge generation is really good, you do a very filthy device, okay, so you don't see a very good efficiency. Okay, so the solar cell I presented you earlier, the last example of 3-foot cell, comes to the third category where the injection is good, the device was not good, so we never got good efficiency. Just by playing with the device, we could improve the device properties, so efficiency was seen. Okay. So all three are possible. So it is important to understand materials which very good charge generation, charge mobility, and also very good device performance. So VOC, JSC, FF, all three are important to get your best efficiency. So Harshita asks, you mentioned you work on ceramics, but as far as my knowledge, it's brittle, so doesn't it affect manufacturing? Okay, sir. Okay, Harshita, this ceramics is not for solar cell applications. These ceramics are actually perovskites, but oxide perovskites. Okay, these oxide perovskites are like sodium bismuth titanate and other things. What we have done is we have doped with rare earth in it and looked at the structure induced emission changes, and can you control the emission, can you control the structure of the material by light or electric field, external electric field. So that is something which is going on. So that is a different field altogether. Any more questions? Maybe you can raise your hand and I can just unmute you one by one. Okay, one more question which is by mention methods adopted for certain calculate uncertainties. Oh, this what we do is every time we make a device, we make more than one device. Okay, so we make 6 devices, 10 devices, 24 devices like that. So once the number of devices are made, you study the properties of this and you average it out. You take a mean of the devices because sometimes your device is really good, sometimes it doesn't good. So I think it was mentioned yesterday about repeatability and reproducibility. Okay, repeatability is what we strive to make lot of measurements, lot of devices, and try to reduce this mean. Okay, plus or minus error should be reduced so that you keep on working on how to make better devices. Okay, Srinivas asked why neodymium has any specific advantage. Srinivas, actually not neodymium, any rare earth would work. Okay, so my student Venkat has worked on 4 different rare earths till now: neodymium, erbium, ytterbium, samarium. So all are showing good data. We just published the neodymium data. That's all. But the story remains the same for other things. In fact, we are going to come up with a paper to show how different rare earths would work comparing to each other. So that is something which is being manuscript is being written. So that is also possible to understand. Someone says, okay, thank you for your wonderful performance. Is it a cue for me to get out? Yeah. Any more questions? If nothing is there, then we can stop our presentation. It's okay. Okay then, yeah. Thank you. Thanks for your time.